An experiment in misery. It was late at night, and a fine rain was swirling softly down, causing the pavements to glisten with hue of steel and blue and yellow in the rays of the innumerable lights. The youth was trudging slowly, without enthusiasm, with his hands buried deep in his trousers pockets, towards the downtown places where beds can be hired for coppers. He was clothed in an aged and tattered suit, and his derby was a marvel of dust-covered crown and torn rim. He was going forth to eat as the wanderer may eat, and sleep as the homeless sleep. By the time he had reached City Hall Park, he was so completely plastered with yells of bum and hobo and with various unholy epithets that small boys had applied to him at intervals, that he was in a state of the most profound dejection. The sifting rain saturated the old velvet collar of his overcoat, and as the wet cloth pressed against his neck, he felt that there no longer could be pleasure in life. He looked about him, searching for an outcast of highest degree, that they too might share miseries, but the lights threw a quivering glare over rows and circles of deserted benches that glistened damply, showing patches of wet sod behind them. It seemed that their usual freights had fled in this night to better things. There were only squads of well-dressed Brooklyn people who swarmed towards the bridge. The young man loitered about for a time and then went off shuffling down Park Row. In the sudden descent and style of the dress of the crowd, he felt relief, and as if he were at last in his own country. He began to see tatters that matched his tatters. In Chatham Square there were aimless men strewn in front of saloons and lodging houses, standing sadly, patiently, reminding one vaguely of the attitudes of chickens in a storm. He aligned himself with these men and turned slowly to occupy himself with the flowing life of the great street. Through the mists of the cold and stormy night, the cable cars went in silent procession, great affairs shining with red and brass, moving with formidable power, calm and irresistible, dangerful and gloomy, breaking silence only by the loud, fierce cry of the gong. 2 rivers of people swarmed along the sidewalks, spattered with black mud, which made each shoe leave a scar-like impression. Overhead, elevated trains, with a shrill grinding of the wheels, stopped at the station, which, upon its leg-like pillars, seemed to resemble some monstrous kind of crab squatting over the street. The quick, fat puffings of the engines could be heard. Down an alley there were somber curtains of purple and black on which street lamps dully glittered like embroidered flowers. A saloon stood with a voracious air on a corner. A sign leaning against the front of the doorpost announced, "Free hot soup tonight." The swing doors, snappy to and fro like ravenous lips, made gratified smacks as the saloon gorged itself with plump men eating with astounding and endless appetite, smiling in some indescribable manner as the men came from all directions like sacrifices to a heathenish superstition. Caught by the delectable sign, the young man allowed himself to be swallowed. A bartender placed a schooner of dark and portentous beer in the bar, its monumental form upreared until the froth atop was above the crown of the young man's brown derby. "Soup over there, gents," said the bartender affably. A little yellow man in rags and the youth grasped their schooners and went with speed towards a lunch counter, where a man with oily but imposing whiskers laid genially upon a kettle until he had furnished with his 2 mendicants with a soup that was steaming hot and in which there were little floating suggestions of chicken. The young man, sipping his broth, felt the cordiality expressed by the warmth of the mixture, and he beamed at the man with oily but imposing whiskers, who was presiding like a priest behind an altar. "Have some more, gents?" he inquired of the 2 sorry figures before him. The yellow little man accepted with a swift gesture, but the youth shook his head and went out, following a man whose wondrous seediness promised that he would have a knowledge of cheap lodging houses. On the sidewalk, he accosted the seedy man. "Say, do you know a cheap place to sleep?" The other hesitated for a time, gazing sideways. Finally he nodded in the direction of the street. "I sleep up there," he said, "when I got the price." "How much?" 10 cents. The young man shook his head dolefully. "That's too rich for me." At that moment there approached
Sample complete. Ready to continue?